All right, Stormy Waters, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Happy to be back. I'm sorry you are finding quality automotive repair services so difficult.
I don't know if I want to talk about that. Actually, as very rarely happens, I'm actually just genuinely butthurt. Like I am angry about that. But it's funny, there's a huge gulf in my show between people I talk to the most on my show and people I talk to most, period. Because this is your second ever appearance on my show. And yet, not only have you and I hung out, uh, I think I probably call you on the phone at least once a week.
At least
Uh,
once a week.
yeah, so I'm glad to have you back on for a recorded conversation, I guess.
No, man, it's really great. I actually find that kind of interesting too because it's the same thing with Pete's show. Like he and I talk every other day, every day, and when I go on, it's kind of like a treat. So I always joke like, are you like getting your fill of me? Hold on.
The answer to that is yes. At the end of our conversations, I'm so sick of you that I never want to talk to you again.
I don't blame you. Like I'm quite an unpleasant person, both in reality and on the phone. But it seems that this trend that we've seemed to identify is a real thing.
Well, see, talking to you on the phone has gotten significantly better now that you're not driving around in a massive 4x4 on mud tires anymore. Because if anyone knows anything about large tires, they make it make an incredible amount of noise. And when you're trying to talk on the phone and you just hear like a massive, just like huge war drum thrumming in the background, it makes it
Yes,
difficult.
it is. Well, now actually, I think that's a problem that you happen to have, which is nice being on the opposite side of that. But yeah, I haven't been able to find like quality. Basically, whatever is happening in the airlines, like with the planes falling out of the sky and like just doors flying off, seems to be happening even further downstream in automotive, like just repairs. Like finding a quality mechanic it's like a dire thing. Like I'm going to make appointments and to drop my car off places where I'm literally like double booking them. Like some like pickup artist guy would do dates. Like this is not going to work out, or I'm probably going to get blown off by this girl. So I'm going to double book myself so I have a backup. Like I'm full on going into a shop going, this is going to end in a disaster. I'm probably going to be able to get out of here with, under $1,000 wasted. And then I needed a place to immediately go to fix the problem that I'm going to bring it to these people for that I 50-50 shot don't think they can do.
Yeah, and I look, you and I have, shall we say, non-standard taste in cars, right? We like
Hmm.
weird, interesting stuff. And so,
Yeah.
look, some of that comes with the territory. It's not an '03 Civic, but at the same time, the the declining competence. When it
Mm.
is like, look, like I am not a bad customer. I am willing to pay for quality work. I'm not super impatient. I just want it done and done right. And when it is, again, a relatively simple fix, or even an unrelated issue that has been caused by, I don't know, an inability to turn a wrench to the right, I don't know, two, three times, not even a lot. Maybe take you a minute. That's the kind of stuff that it gets me a little angry. I'll put it that way. But you have a lot of context in the business world, so you can probably speak to this. Talking to people who regularly hire and fire, that there does seem to have been a pretty significant cultural change with regards to work, right? And I don't want to sound like Dave Ramsey here talking about the kids these days, but there does seem to be some kind of broad cultural shift on that front.
Yeah, culture, yes. In fact, that's actually very politely put because I guess you could put it that like everyone is a lazy fuck now, is the way that
Yeah.
I hear it. So like let's put it this way, like getting people and there's like a kind of like cultural amnesia, right? Like uh, COVID was what, 2 years, maybe three,
Hmm.
and the knowledge of the before time is completely gone in people's brains. right? Like the indignation that these guys are getting for trying to get their staff back in the office, which the place, like the office, as in like the corner office I have given you because you're a high value employee, the corner office adorned with all of the pictures of your family and all the other shit because you spent the last 7 or 8 years in this fucking, you know, very nice place, this very nice desk I bought you. All right. And now getting you to come inside the building and sit in this nice place is basically, um, I don't know, tantamount to committing some type of, mid-century genocide or something. Like this is the level of, insanity that these, like, basically trying to get people back into the fucking office where they can actually do work is making a lot of guys that are generally very good leaders pull their fucking hair out. Like
Well,
they just don't know where it's coming from. Because if it's your business, like, I'm sorry, like it's just like a checked outness to where like there is no buy-in anymore. Right? It's not like a money thing either. Like you could be a partner in a firm and then all of a sudden after a couple of years of working at home, like you don't really care if it succeeds or not. It's like a type of individual nihilism. I know nihilism is like an individual thing, but I'm talking about like nihilism towards things in your individual day-to-day life that is extremely unhealthy.
well, and look, right? Like, you and I are not like Reaganite capitalists, right? We're not.
I am not a Reaganite capitalist. That is a very accurate description of me. Yes.
So, but point being, right? Like, my point here is not necessarily that like the point of your existence in the world is to work, or the point of American society is to marginally increase the GDP year over year. But I think we can all recognize that effectively after COVID, standards for acceptable behavior in any number of areas dropped like a rock. Like what was considered to be normal. And look, like I'm someone who works from home. I get that. So I am not trying to speak from ivory tower here. But at the same time, it's like you look at any number of different areas. Like we've mentioned air travel, right, which is just an absolute rolling disaster. To the point where it's like, I mean, when is the last time you talked to someone who flew and was not majorly delayed, didn't have something, just on a basic level break down? Like when I was flying out to, an event for the OGC, my flight was delayed for several hours because the door fell off the plane on the runway.
Wait,
Like
what? You didn't tell me this part. The door fell off the fucking plane on the runway with you in the fucking plane?
no, but before anyone got on.
Oh,
And
thank God.
it was shortly after that other case where the door got sucked off the plane in flight. It was much less dramatic, but nonetheless, right? It's not particularly comforting when you look out the window and you're like, wait a minute, why is the door on the ground? Why is everyone
Oh
gathered around this
God.
plane fire hall waiting for like now 4 or 5
Oh
hours, right,
God.
for something to be done about it? But point is, right, that indicates kind of a declining in standard. And look,
It's
like
just
obviously,
domestic though. Well, at
what's
least with
that?
the plane thing, it's just domestic. I've noticed that every time I fly on international airlines, it is no problem, right? It's the before time on like Turkish Air, Emiratis, the what you call it, the Singapore, just all of the other airlines. This is strictly just an America at home thing.
Well, and you see it as well with the actual like physical manufacturing, right? In the sense that you've heard, as I'm sure, all of the news about the massive scandal, the massive cover up at Boeing, which obviously a huge manufacturer, where they were receiving subpar components from China and from other countries, kind of knowingly using them or cutting their kind of QA department in order to meet certain targets. And then surprise, surprise, when you simultaneously have decreasing inputs, a a decreasing, competence in your workforce, you get a subpar product. And it's interesting you mentioned the before times, because it seems to be a similar turning point to something like 9/11, which looked like, I don't remember. I was technically around for it, but not really sentient.
I
Where it's
always
kind of like,
forget that you like were barely alive at 9/11. That fucking bother. It makes me feel old as shit, and I hate it. But go
but
on.
point is, from the elderly people I talk to who remember the pre-existing world, they talk about that being kind of a before and after. And in many cases, things got worse. The general justification was blah, 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 something terrorism. But it basically seemed to just be an excuse to make your life more miserable. And the combination of COVID, inflation, and supply chain issues seem to be the same thing.
Yeah, and I think also you made people afraid in a way that I don't think they were even afraid during 9/11. Right? Like even in post 9/11 world, you got like hyper vigilance in the society. Like, if some guy in a turban, which apparently is an Indian thing and not like an Arab, who cares, really, frankly, right? Because Osama wore one of those in like one of the videos. So any type of head dressing, would qualify. So if you saw somebody in a type of Middle Eastern headdress walk into any type of like crowded area, some boomer was calling like 911 or Homeland Security saying like, we need to get somebody down here to monitor this guy, or I'm going to follow him around. Like individual vigilance and buy-in. Everything else went to shit, but like they weren't really scared in the sense that people at all levels of society were scared during COVID. I mean, yes, it was retarded, but like at this point in time, large amounts of the country and being in our sphere, oh my God, I can't even, it makes me cringe at the people that were like I don't know if you remember, but there were a lot of people on the right that weren't correct on COVID, right? Like, oh, this is like a chud thing, questioning COVID is a chud thing. But we've had a healthy distrust for media for a long time. But prior to COVID, you could say that large swaths of society did not. And particularly the type of people who the 9/11 like hypervigilance buy-in kind of missed, like the professional class people were scared.
Well,
And
this is. I was having a phone call with my buddy Osen, been around for a long time, and we were talking about how you can kind of look at the Trump phenomenon as a rejection of expertise writ large, right? Of the kind of
mm,
accreditation ability of the regime.
mm,
And it's obviously, with a lot of people kind of between our ages, a lot of that happened during Gamergate, right? Which was effectively trained experts in media saying, things aren't getting worse. You don't believe your lying eyes. This is better. And if you notice the problem, there's something wrong with you. But we were talking about how there was kind of a proto version of this in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, with movies like Dirty Harry and Death Wish, which were extremely popular movies with, shall we say, very right wing, very reactionary themes in them. Dirty hippies are ruining the world, and you just need a grumpy old man with a gun to blast away,
yes,
inner city gangsters.
I believe
And
this.
the the I guess the delta between the official approved, like Roger Ebert critic reading on those, we would consider like a proto version of media literacy, was something like, this is absolute gutter trash, playing to people's worst instincts. This is, appalling. And yet they did very well. They were very popular. They spawned a number of sequels, and people really resonated with them. In that, right, is a initial, right, distrust of the expert, right, the kind of approved wisdom. And obviously the whole media thing, it's how a lot of people get here, but that's the tip of the iceberg. You don't stop there, but it's a good kind of entrance point. But you're 100% right. Like, with honestly, in many ways, from the transition, after the Cold War is really where you see in the first splinter factions of the right in America in numbers, right? There were always people outside this, but break away from that, right? You have the militia movement, you have through the 90s, the kind of reaction to, the ATF. And a lot of it like really ramped up during George Bush. Like a lot of the elder millennials in our sphere got their start opposing George Bush, opposing the war on terror, or they got sucked into it and got to see it firsthand. But then I think that for people, I mean, it wasn't just young people, but young people definitely got pushed that way. COVID was a very similar thing. It was a huge contrast between the officially approved wisdom and what was apparent. And when we look at the system, when we see it flailing, I think a big part of the reason it is flailing is because traditionally its soft power was weaponized through experts, right? It's like, oh, here's a man in a suit who says something. 9 out of 10 doctors agree. 9 out of 10 scientists agree. The Pentagon War College or whatever. And well, certainly, expertise still has weight to it. People are more likely to trust, given no additional information, right? A guy with a PhD than a stranger yelling on the street corner with a hand painted sign. But nonetheless, that system of accreditation, right? The Ivy Leagues, any others have massively discredited themselves. And again, I'm not a populist, right? I don't think that people are going to wake up and there's going to be some kind of Alex Jones style 1776 will commence again. But at the same time, that ruling formula, right, that justification for rule, which is, we, the experts, have been trained and ought to manage society as we see fit, that's ringing more and more hollow. So sorry, that was a massive, massive rant from me, Stormy.
No,
You got me
it's actually
talking about power.
true. It's not like a rant if you're stating facts, because imagine being the person that sees the experts, because it was the expert class that was pissing their pants during COVID. It was the accredited class that was pissing their pants. So in the moment of truth, right? So like, we are smarter than you, thus we deserve to rule, right? Event comes down the pike where, generally, headship would need to be expressed. We didn't get it. We got the people that are supposed to be in charge running around terrified of everything. And it was like kind of like the great revealing. And I don't know if this is kind of connected to the nihilism that we see, like at an individual level, like how Yaki talks about the American being special because to him it's his personal imperium, right? Like the American differs from the European because the empire is one of his own, right? I think we saw the exact, I almost lost my train of thought there, but the individual, basically Chud, got to see the people in charge be scared of a cold, and like what that must do to create a sense of none of the shit matters. Because where do you draw the line on what matters then? Because I'm trying to think of like where else we would see that. Like it's such a crazy meta phenomenon that I haven't heard anybody else talk about until you and I started bitching about cars or qualified car repair, right? We've heard people talk about it in Boeing, and then it's chalked up to DEI, right? But it's not DEI people that are running these mechanic shops, is it?
Well, I
No.
honestly, I think that there's another element to it as well. I've spoken at great length about the fact that my wife, works in, education at an elementary school, and between what she said, and then what I've seen on the internet, which obviously could be completely and totally fake, but it seems to be telling the same story. There was a post going around talking about a teacher complaining on Reddit, I believe, about
Hmm.
how their talented students had given up because effectively the teacher was no longer allowed to take off points for late work, to consider, the kind of aesthetics of something, how neatly it's done. And so, talented students were getting really frustrated. They're like, what the heck? I spent, days working on this, poster board for my fourth grade class. I made it look good. And I get the same grade as, Johnny come lately, who turns it in 3 days later and did the whole thing in, ballpoint pen. Right. And at least according to this anonymous teacher, which again could be fake, but I've heard many more anecdotes that support the same point. Those kids basically give up. They're like, what is the point? And I think that when we talk about an economy such as ours, right, where there is a certain level of stagnation, but also so many of the things people do are largely unproductive, right? It doesn't really generate anything. And where growth does come in many cases, it's effectively in the form of like show games, right? It's a scam. It's not really making anything. It's not providing a service as much as you are kind of just shuffling numbers around. And obviously you see this in the kind of like laptop class, the middle and the upper middle class who, largely do kind of make work jobs.
Yeah, we've
But
had a
also
meme
similarly,
meme coin economy. Like
yeah,
nobody
exactly.
realized we had a meme coin economy. We just thought these were stocks that were serious companies doing serious things full of serious people, and it's
Well,
not.
and my point is, right, if you are, a talented hard worker, right? If you're someone who does, something difficult, and this could, very easily be something like a skilled tradesman or something, there's, I can see the psychological, I guess, pull towards, just like this doesn't matter. I will be rewarded no more than someone doing poor work. The people who are getting highly rewarded are not really doing anything worthwhile. And the things that traditionally marked out kind of social progression, buying a house, settling down, the things that traditionally drove men to work very, very hard. Well, at a certain point, like that's still available. Like, look, like, I'm proof of that. But it becomes more and more difficult to do. And so I think that it's the same thing you saw in, late millennials, early Gen Z of men just checking out. Like, why would I bother? Because it's out of reach. And that's obviously on an individual level, not the correct thing to do. That won't make your life better. But it's an understandable reaction to a game that, seems to be rigged.
Well, and there's the thing, it also engenders a particular type of predatory behavior out of people that would otherwise not be. Right? Because the same element that you're talking about, like why would I even try? Why would I even bother? It also seems to be applying to like why wouldn't I fuck over? It's created a very like me versus everyone, and I've seen and also like a readiness for otherwise perfectly good and normal people, right? Like some of the mechanics that we're talking about, right? Why it's so hard. It's not like the people that you and I are taking automobiles to are in particular, unqualified or particularly, bad at their jobs or uneducated. And yeah, it's a combination of I don't care and also I don't care if this really fucks somebody up.
Well, and yeah, there's definitely something to that. If you've ever spent time around, and when I mean older people, I mean silent generation, right? So
Yes.
before boomers, you'll oftentimes see them in situations where they're confused, right? Not just because of their age, but because they're in a very different culture from the one that they are accustomed to. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that America is in the process of, and quite advanced, right? Like this is not a new thing, of moving from a high trust to a low trust society,
Yes.
right? In a situation, and I think of my friend's grandparents, right, who grew up in rural small town America, before the death of manufacturing, before the proliferation of hard drugs, and even among very very poor people, right? Effectively subsistence farmers. There was a certain amount of dignity. There was a certain amount of, I guess, what you could consider like keeping up appearances that meant that you were always extremely socially conscious. Right? You didn't want to do something kind of low or shady because that would come back to you. That would hurt your social standing. And of course, I'm not naive enough to assume one, that these people didn't have problems, or two, that this didn't happen. Of course it did. Humans are humans. They will do bad things. But to say that when that culture fractures, when there is no longer that shared moral consensus about what the right thing to do is, or, and to be honest, I think part of this is the fact that we have become a much more multicultural society. I think another part
Yes.
of it is that traditional institutions have largely died. You have people who don't really do things, who don't go outside, who don't interact with others, who don't have a physical social presence. And if they do have one, it's entirely digital, which one means that it can be curated. And I do realize the deep irony of making this point behind an anonymous profile picture, but you know what? I've never let hypocrisy stop me before. But not only is it, you were able to curate what others see, but you were also able to curate what community you interact with. You can find a group of people who will excuse almost any poor behavior. I mean, look at the this Austin Metcalf thing, right? The white track athlete who got stabbed. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
sure. There's a certain amount of, shall we say, ethnic solidarity in a certain community that is always present, right? We can look back at history on this. But he could not have gathered nearly $1 million in donations from the people who physically live around him. Right? That would be impossible. But because of the internet, where you can distort anything in any way you really want, and then also be heavily financially rewarded for that, right? Again, it goes back to the point of like that's sort of that meme coin economy, where it's like the way to hit it big in some circumstances is not to do something particularly productive, but it's to basically kind of like harness an online community. And you see that obviously in the negative instances of these kind of like fundraising campaigns, but also in the whole like influencer economy, right? Like those people don't do anything. I don't do anything. I'm not you at home. I'm not giving you anything, but your attention is valuable to advertisers. And look, like
You're
I
actually just facilitating the taking.
yeah,
Right?
which I realize,
I'm creating a perfectly good funnel for advertisers to sell you stuff you don't need and don't want. But to your point about the influencers, right? I was reading, I live in South Florida, as many people know, and it's quite an expensive place to live, particularly made so during COVID and immediately post COVID, where the population of South Florida, no joke, tripled. It's become completely unlivable, and I probably won't be staying here much longer. But there's been a huge backwardation in the housing market, and it's kind of caught everyone by surprise. Like they think that I guess they thought this could go on for forever. Like if you're, and this is another thing that pisses me off. Kind of like the tariff thing, where boomers are freaking out about like their house prices going down. Like motherfucker, your house doubled from 2020 to 2022, and then almost doubled again from 2022 to 2024. You know none of this is real. You will decry inflation everywhere around you. But the minute reality starts to take a chunk out of your pretend money, because as much as we live in a meme economy, this goes across all age groups, except for one age group doesn't really understand, and the other age group isn't really fucking bought in. All right, so it creates this weird disconnect. But there's a particular freak out about the housing prices and housing market in general. And somebody brought up a point that was like, this is actually going to metastasize very rapidly in Miami, where others, like other areas like Palm Beach, where people are more settled and kind of more established financially, we can call it like intergenerational land, where it wouldn't be the case there. And the reason that he brought up, and I didn't have anything to counter with it, because I immediately knew he was right. And it made me sick to my stomach that he was right. He's like, a good chunk of Miami property renters and buyers are social media influencers, like micro celebs, influencers, blogger, basically the type of non-productive internet famous, um, pretend internet famous money, who are transient by nature and whose finances disappear as quickly as they appear. And when he said this, I was like, oh shit, he's right. Like, when this goes, it's going to go very rapidly. And if it's already starting, it's going to accelerate. Because I think there is going to be a time, probably quite soon, where the rubber has to meet the road, and pretend things can only be pretend for so long. Right. Basically, we joke to lefties all the time about them having luxury beliefs, but we forget that we live in a luxury economy. It doesn't feel like a luxury economy because it fucking sucks. And generally, if you're on the lower end of the income totem pole, it's borderline hopeless. But it's equally something that can only exist if non-productivity is allowable, right? So if basically things are so good, if there's, like, I try and explain to boomers that are freaking out about tariffs and things like that, like, hey, yesterday you were crying about the national debt, right? A trade deficit is a debt. No nation has a right, or sorry, every nation has a right to say, I will get out of debt. I would like to lower my debt. And if other countries view your country, when they're trying to get out of debt, as an attack that they need to retaliate against, then maybe they're not your friends, right? If somebody comes up to me and says, hey, Stormy, I'm going to get out of debt, I'm going to say, how fucking dare you? We are now enemies, and I'm going to try and hurt you financially. Like, maybe I am not your friend. Boomers don't really understand that at all. They think that all of this is like just forever going to exist. And large swaths of our economy, the things that actually, I know this is not a new take. Everyone talks about, like, oh yeah, well, we used to build stuff, now we don't build stuff. We used to, make things, now we don't make things, and we're gonna have to start making things again. Yes, all of those things are true. But that also means that what you're doing now isn't real, and that's also gonna have to go away too.
Well, and this
And I
is
think
something.
I think this is where the nihilism comes in, because you make internet monies, my friend.
Yes.
If a person doesn't make internet monies, but what they do at their day job isn't really making anything important or feeling valuable at all, and they're just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? This is another thing that I've seen across the board in VC investing, right? So VC during COVID, like from 2020 to 2022, VC investments cratered, right? And then from 2022 to 2024, it actually got worse. Everyone thought, like, oh, but AI, tech craze, AI, Magnificent Seven, whatever. Outside of all of the hype, once you peel it back, there were very few checks being cut, very few new startups being funded. And that's by the VC's choice. And eventually, less and less founders were sending you their pitch decks. But even the VCs know that there's another shoe about to, everyone feels it in the investment community. Everyone feels like there's another shoe about to drop, and I think every person does too. So it makes it very, very. I'm trying to put myself in these people's shoes. Like, if I know that it's kind of bad and things are uncertain, and my job is probably pretend, and it doesn't really matter, and I know that at some point in time it's going to get manifestly worse, I can just feel it, I would probably check out too.
Well, and I think that you mentioned nihilism earlier, and I'm not saying you were doing this, but there is often a a lazy use of that term,
Probably
which
me
is
doing that.
no, which is not what we're talking about here, because nihilism is often kind of like parodied as the kind of depressed teenager, nothing matters, it's all pointless. But really, when we see something, in a culture like ours, which effectively cannibalizes its youth in order
Yes.
to prop up an elderly generation, which you see in a number of ways, right? You see this in high-end sports stars, like Tom Brady literally having a blood boy whose blood he can cycle through his body. LeBron James has said that he does that as well, let alone all of the, shall we say, more tinfoil hat adjacent conversations about adrenochrome and stuff like that, which maybe is a
Hey,
discussion for
we
another
have we
day.
have guys that are on the right apparently, or that people on the right identify with, that measure their kids' boners for their own health. So
Yeah, and Brian Johnson guy,
yeah,
uh,
so that's a real
who,
thing apparently.
yeah, I'll put it this way: Mormons, what are you doing? Because every time I find out someone famous is Mormon, they're really weird. But again, discussion for another time. But okay, so you have that, which is like a literal part of it. But then you have
Yeah,
something like abortion as well, which is the same thing. Right? Killing the young in order to maximize the economic profitability of people who could be mothers. And then obviously with the boomer generation, you have something like COVID, which killed, I think it was 0.5% of people over 70. And in order to avoid that, right, like the idea that minimizing 70 plus mortality is a reason to shut down all of society, right? To take the economy, kick its legs out, stick people at home, and give them fake money from the government. Again, it's the same thing, right? It is that we will mortgage our future in order to make our present more pleasurable for this kind of nursing home generation. Right? The entire point of our society is effectively to keep these people healthy, wealthy, and voting. And I understand the mechanics of why that is the case. It's a massive voting block. It's a very wealthy voting block. I get that. That's not my point. But it does speak to a kind of a sickness, right? A prioritization of the here and now, a prioritization of the old. And look, like I like old people generally. I get along with them well. I think that much
literally
damage.
more boomer friends than I have. They're very good boomers. They're very plugged in and aware of the situation. Boomers, but yeah, I get along with mostly old people more than I do with young people. I have
And
very little in
similarly,
common.
there's been an immense amount of damage done to the West through generational warfare, through pitting one age block against the other. But let's not pretend that our baby boomer generation is an august generation of you know responsible conservative statesmen, right? Whatever we could imagine that is. These people are the children of the post-war consensus, literally. They are the
Children.
first generation of the regime as we know it. And it
Yep.
is, for the most part, irreparably warped their brains.
They only had three. I was talking to my mother about this. I finally gotten her to throw out her television, which was impossible to do with my father. But they only had three television stations. And the news was on one television. It was on all of the television stations, but only for 1 hour. So if nothing was presented to you in that hour, it fundamentally did not exist. So I think today, like, it is impossible for us to understand the level of mental control that was exerted on the boomers because of television. Right? Their whole life, like their whole conceptual realities, how they index with the world, like they were programmed in the most literal sense from the basically the day that they were born, in a saturation that we as online native people cannot even understand. Like they are children of the regime in the realest sense. And a thing that's uncomfortable that I'm having to talk with a lot of my similarly aged friends, right? Not older people, but they're coming to a time where they're realizing that they have to start treating their boomer parents like children. And then when they're having these moments, they realize that they were always children. Like it's like taking grandpa's keys away, but then realizing that grandpa was really actually never able to drive in the fucking first place. Like the boomers never developed. Like they're not adults in the same way that we see adults. Basically, we see what adults should be by the big gaping adult shaped hole in our reality, and then seeing how that was filled in past generations. Like when you look at the baby boomers, man, they're toddlers. And I mean this in the realist sense, how they index with their children, how they index with the world around them, how they think just things are magic, right? Like if you ask a boomer why their IRA or why their 401k gives them money, they have absolutely no idea. They don't know what they're invested in. They don't know how it actually works. They don't understand that certain prerequisite conditions need to be met for the magic money machine to spit out cruise ship money. But they think that it's a cruise ship money machine. So therefore, it just gets spat out. And it was because of that what happened during COVID was able to happen, right? The largest transfer of fucking wealth in human history happened in COVID, out of the boomers' pockets into a very, very small number of pockets. And they didn't know because they don't know how the fucking machine works. And then when you tunnel down, they really don't know how anything works because that information was denied them. Right? So you and I, if we're interested in something, anything we come across, any random fucking factoid about some weird animal or some crazy geographic feature or some uncontacted tribe, we can just click next, and go from like page to page to page until we have learned everything that we personally want to know about a thing. They couldn't, because it would be 15 minutes of learning about the thing, then commercial break, then a new thing. So we're able to actually know things, whatever it is that we do know, right? Whether it's X topic or something else, our knowledge about any given thing that we're knowledgeable about is infinitely more depth than them. And I think that the reason why things are the way they are is actually because, and I don't know whether it was, silent generation, people still hanging on before, but it seems that things really got off the rails when the boomers actually had complete control, when it was complete total boomer dominance, because these people don't actually know things. The only thing that they know will maybe be their career field that they were forced to participate in, day in, day out for their entire lives. But any other individual discrete thing outside of that purview, they are absolutely ignorant of.
Well, I think part of it is, we've been talking about the central role of expertise and authority. And if we talk about a world like the one you were describing earlier, where there are 3 television networks, that is your one stream of information. You have the newspaper and then people around you.
Yep.
That can be much more controlled.
Who
And
only ever watched the same news channel as you?
And obviously there are benefits to this, right? When we talk about having a unified culture, right, a culture where people have the same reference points, right, the same general values, that's helpful for that, right? When people have the same context. However, when that's used by kind of like a ghastly satanic regime like ours, obviously that produces horrible results. And so I think that one of the advantages of you and I being children of the decline is that we have lived in a world of pure narrative, right? Where almost everything you can find, dozens of hyper partisan opinions on anything, mutually contradictory. And there are two reactions to that. One of them is to get sucked in, to get turned into, a mental slave. And then the other one, is to effectively become, as Thomas would say, kind of like a soldier of the apocalypse, right? Like these are the situations I am born into. This is, from a certain perspective, a bad one, but I can become, suited to this. I can learn this terrain. And when we look at the phrase from Baudrillard, or maybe it's the Matrix quoting Baudrillard, right? The desert of the real, where it's actually very difficult to find truth that has not been touched by ideology. I think that the healthy reaction to that is to have an extreme distrust towards information, because you've seen, right? We have all seen how that can be completely and totally distorted. How these allegedly impartial, these allegedly august institutions of knowledge, right? Like the NIH, or like pick your poison. Well, they're no more immune to this than anything else. We live in a time of narrative. And you see this as well in the kind of media consumption habits of certain people, right? Like the SJW destroyed that thing, right? The libtards destroyed with facts and logic. That still exists for the boomer right. They've never moved on from that. They love an expose. Like, oh, we got them, guys. We showed them with the numbers. But several things there. One, that doesn't change anything. That person doesn't leave saying, I've been convinced, I'm going to stop being a gender communist. It doesn't politically matter. And also, let's be honest, where did those numbers come from? Right? There's a multitude of things baked into that. And so my point is not to say, like, let's, abandon rationality. Let's abandon, factual data. But to say, like, that well has been so poisoned, right? Those sources have been so distorted that if you were operating in their world, you're playing on their terms. And you're taking these arguments, taking these discussions to a moral perspective, right? This is wrong. You mentioned it earlier, right? About societies or cultures should have the ability to get out of debt. You're not necessarily making an argument with a bar graph. You were saying this is right, this is wrong. That's a fundamental shift. And when we're talking about getting out of that post-war consensus, I think that moving towards the kind of moral landscape is a part of that. Because when you see the neocons, when you see the neoliberals, right, whatever you want to call these people, except in very scarce terms, they never speak in
ethno-religious
tendencies. We'll go with that.
Supremacists. I guess
Yeah, yeah.
The only racial supremacists.
So point is, that was another long digression, but I do think that
No, you're kind of onto something, bro.
Yeah, kind of, and that's how the show goes. But I think that as we see the boomers die out, because I think that in 2026 we'll be at the 50% mark on boomers, right?
Somebody remembers. I forgot. Mr. Burton has actually excellent conversational memory, everyone. So yes, we do have a giant boomer problem that I don't think anybody is really kind of bracketing for. The entire economy, Jay, the entire economy. So God damn it, I think I'm about to just contradict my whole point, because if you understood it in this capacity, you would just check out. Fuck. Damn it. So everything, whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's IRAs, 401ks, that are like like pension funds, whether it is property taxes and municipal governments and municipal bond issuances, everything in our economy is geared for growth. But the problem is that the only group of people that we're allowed to let's just say, hold on to the capital during this growth that is required. They themselves did not grow, right? So it is the boomers who are paying the property taxes that hold up these municipal governments. It is the boomers who basically allow the healthcare system to exist as it does, right? The boomers need to stay alive for forever and also at the same time need to grow for this to continue on its merry way, and it's not. The system cannot handle backwardation at all whatsoever, right? Backwardation is death, right? It's like if you and I are on a desert island and I only have the only $10 that exists on this island is in my pocket. And I say, well, I'm not doing anything with my $10. I should think about a place to do, to put it. And you're like, hey, well, I would like to borrow that $10 to do things. I'll say, sure. You can borrow my $10 at 10% interest, right? And you take the $10 and you go do things with it. But where is that 11th dollar going to come from to pay me my 10% interest?
Was that a hypothetical question, or were you
It's
looking for an example?
it's a hypothetical question that poses that highlights the reality of our economy writ large, right? So where does the growth come from? The growth needs to come from somewhere. And if all of a sudden the people that keep the economy running, right, the largest capital holders, they do the most paying of the things. As much as, boomers fuck over everyone else, they are equally as fucked over and vampirized themselves. So much of what we see today from housing markets, what the housing market is the mortgage market is the insurance market, and also the institutional, like you also say, so the mortgage market is also the agencies and municipals, which would be the like agency municipals as far as bonds go. Actually, that works two ways because also the property taxes are also what holds up municipals and agencies. Municipal and agency bonds holds up the insurance industry. Insurance industry holds up the investment banking industry, and on and on and on and on. Except for we lose roughly 9 to 13% of boomers every year. So they're in finite supply. Their capital and their expenses will not, they're not going to be picked up by the next generation. There's simply not enough of us. All of the people that they've imported, right, haven't had enough time to accumulate enough capital. Right? So when boomer dies, it's either going to be his house is inherited or it's going to be sold. But the problem is that there are 20%, if you add up Gen Z and millennials together, we represent maybe a quarter. In real terms, the number is really hard to find. You have to tease it out by going to two different places, right? Because if you look at just the demographics by age, right, the number's not apparent because they stuff that number full of, immigrants of various types and legalities. But when you think to yourself, well, okay, none of these immigrants have had enough time to accumulate capital or were born of parents that had enough time to accumulate capital. So if we were to minus that group out and only focus on Americans that, I don't know, let's say were born of parents that were either born here or born of parents. So basically 2 generations or 3 generations in America, enough time to actually put away some money. Because, I mean, granted, as good as the boomers are at squandering, they inherited both in terms of actual real capital and also general prosperity that they got to ride, which is downstream of the same thing. Their kids, right? Kids like you and me, call them heritage American individuals. We are going to inherit some of that. Granted, a lot of it's going to be blown on cruises and reverse mortgages sold by, I don't know, Burt Reynolds or whatever. But that still leaves a big problem. Let's just say just in houses. Just in houses, you have 4 times as many boomers conservatively as there are people like us that can actually buy them. So how do you sell 4 houses to one person? The answer is you don't, unless you devalue that home 75%. Right. So basically, when the boomers are gone, as the boomers die out, the economy, the growth machine economy, is going to grind to a halt and break. And it's going to break in a fucking big way. And for all the things Donald Trump is doing, I don't think it's enough, frankly. So I can understand why people are checked out. Because the shoe that they're waiting to drop, that everyone feels existentially is waiting to drop, is in fact coming.
Well, that was a cheery note to end what was supposed to be a lighthearted podcast.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about any of the things that we were supposed to talk about. Damn it! It was like a.
Well, I guess I might have to have you back
like,
on in another 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, it's a bant cast, but all depressing banter.
Well, dude, we are fast coming up on time. If people want to find more of you, where can they do so?
Nowhere, and I encourage them not to. No, just joking. Just at Norman.new on Twitter, or just type in Stormy Waters. I'll be the top person, I'm sure.
As far as my stuff, Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you want to check out my podcast, you can. The deep irony of this is not lost on me, but if you do want to support the show, you should.
There you go.
I just had to file taxes for this show, and I made I calculated my hourly rate, and it wasn't worth it. But if you want to make it slightly more worth it, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching, North Appalachian Supply for all your gear needs. Appreciate it, gents.
He needs to get those dollars before those dollars don't exist. The internet money is fast drawing up. We hate to see him, digging ditches or something.
I probably deserve it.
He's far too pretty for that.
All right. Everyone at home, keep your head up. Like it lasts forever. Good night.